Welcome to the Intentional Encourager podcast, where each episode brings you compelling conversations and stories designed to entertain, enlighten, and encourage. And now here's your host, Brian Sexton.
Welcome, everybody, to the Intentional Encourager podcast. I'm your host, Brian Sexton. Thank you so much for joining me today. And I have one of the neatest people that I know joining me today on the Intentional Encourager podcast. He is a sales leader, a speaker, and he has just started his own podcast called Lead, Sell, Grow. And I love leadership, I love selling, and I like growing. I just don't like growing out. I like growing inwardly. And my friend Harry Spaight is here joining me this morning on the Intentional Encourager podcast. I should say today, because you never know when we're going to release these things. Harry, how are you doing today?
I am doing great. Thanks for the intro. And yes, I don't want to be growing out either. This is the age where we have to worry about that.
Well, I think we're all dealing with a little bit of the quarantine 15, so to speak. So
yes, indeed. My refrigerator is too close to the office.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Harry, you have got an unusual story, a neat story. You've taken an unusual journey in life. Kind of take us back to the beginning, your childhood. Although you're a Floridian right now, you are not a native Floridian. You grew up in the New England area, correct?
I did. I grew up in the state of Massachusetts, in a small farming factory town, if you will. Not a lot of visionaries. People lived there their entire lives, and it just was really not for me in the big picture of things. But a lot of great values stem from there.
Yeah, when you were growing up, you know, and a lot of kids in that area, when you live near a major metropolitan area, and I'm sure you were, about an hour from Boston?
Yeah, a little bit.
Growing up.
Yeah.
You live in a major metropolitan area, and obviously there are industries that are popular to that area. There are things that maybe expectations from family, like, hey, you know, because we live here, you're going to do this. I know in West Virginia, in a lot of areas, the expectations are when kids grow up, they're going to go work in the coal mines because that's just what they have been used to being around. When you were growing up, what did young Harry Spaight aspire to be when you quote unquote grew up?
Yeah, that's I'm still kind of figuring that one out, Brian. So, but yeah, it's an interesting thing. My dad was a Ivy Leaguer, and you know, most of my friends' dads worked in factories, so it was a weird dynamic. And you know, for whatever reason, my father was fortunate enough to get into Harvard and then Tufts, and you know, he went that route. And unfortunately, I was a bit of a rebel in high school, and you know, things just worked out differently for me. So, and what did I want to be? I really had no clue. I was one of those that just stumbled across things in life, and you know, you make connections with people and they say, hey, do you ever think about doing this? Or would you like to do that? And I said, sure, why not?
Did you ever feel that pressure internally from your parents because your dad was an intellectual? I'm sure your mom kind of followed along in that path, but you know, there's pressure sometimes for the children to follow in the parents' footsteps. Did you ever feel that same pressure to maybe go to Harvard or go to Tufts or go to maybe a Brown or a Yale?
No. I mean, it was my father was very hands-off on things, and my mom was just the exact opposite. By the way, she was not. I mean, I think had maybe an 8th grade education.
Oh wow!
So it was really an interesting, you know, and plus my parents were much older. So my parents were, 40 plus years older than me. So my parents were like my friend's grandparents, by the way. So it wasn't an odd thing to say, are those your grandparents? I'm like, no, that would be my parents. So
How was that dynamic in your home growing up? Because It's similar, and I mean no disrespect to my wife. My wife has an associate's degree. I have a bachelor's and a master's degree.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there's sometimes where education becomes somewhat of a pedestal kind of thing.
Yeah.
In other words, I have 2 degrees, you don't, I'm smarter, you're not. Was there ever did you ever see your dad really kind of say, look at my education? Because the reason I asked this is I fell into that trap after I got my MBA.
Yeah.
I was so proud of the education that I garnered. Like, well, I've got
Sure.
an MBA. I've got an MBA. Did you ever see that with your dad where education, because those are 2 of the most prestigious universities in the country.
Right.
Did you ever see your dad kind of flaunt that type of educational
Yeah, I mean, it's
pedigree?
interesting, but yeah, good question. I've never really experienced that at all. So I was, again, this is the 1970s. It's 10 years from Woodstock. I grew up, as a young child in the 60s with an older sister who was 15 years older than me or so.
Mm-hmm.
And so I learned, I mean, I was listening to the Beatles when I was 4. Right. I mean, it was just, Iron Butterfly, weird metal, drug, LSD music. So I kind of grew up in my parents didn't really understand anything that I was doing. So when I'm buying these albums.
Hey, mine neither. Don't feel bad. Mine neither.
Yes. So, I mean, when you have 2 generations or a full generation skipping parents to the child, it was just a very weird dynamic. So I think my parents were happy when I moved out of the house eventually. And they said, good, let's get rid of this guy. He's not like us. He's different.
They found you somewhere, Moses, hiding in the bulrushes.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, I look back with fond memories of it. I mean, we all learn. I'm not one of, there's nothing to blame. I mean, I was just joking with someone the other day. It's like, I grew up a fairly normal kid. I mean, I was different.
Yeah.
But I can't blame my parents for anything. So I can't really write any books because I have no tragedies in my childhood.
That different kind of life, and my family has that same type of dynamic. I'm 17 years older than my youngest sister. Mm-hmm. So my parents adopted her when I was a senior in high school. And I understand that dynamic because she was 11 when my wife and I found out we were going to have a baby. Mm-hmm. And so she was used to being the baby, and now we're having a child of our own. So I understand that dynamic. When you moved out, what was the thought process in your mind of where you were going and what you were going to do to get from point A to point B?
Yeah, all right. So this is one of my challenges in life back then. I was really not much of a planner. So I just did again, can't blame my parents for anything. I just did not have a clue. I didn't have those conversations about what should you do with your life. None of those conversations really. My father just said, you'll figure it out. And I was telling, a friend of mine, or actually my co-host on the podcast, is that, so I was big into comedy. I just, my release was comedy, and I was a huge fan of Woody Allen back in the 70s. Saw all of his movies, read his books, and he, really was had this weird, morbid view of death. Mm-hmm. So that got me thinking about big picture. So I'm 16, 17 years old. I'm asking my friends about what they think happens when we die and all.
What's the meaning of life?
Right, huh? Exactly. And they're like, what is wrong with you? Get away from me. So it's just my friends kind of thought I was cuckoo, and I can't really blame them. Who looks to Woody Allen as their as their reason for figuring things out in life? But anyway, long story short, that's when I started becoming a little more spiritually minded and got involved with religion and making new friends, and it was a completely different lifestyle. And I learned, wasn't about really being saved for me. It was about how do I help others?
Mm-hmm.
You know, once I kind of said there's a bigger picture, maybe others need to know about this and I can help other people. And that set me on a trajectory of that, working in the inner cities, learning to speak Spanish, living in the Dominican Republic, you know, going to countries like Russia, right after the fall of communism, breaking up pieces of the Berlin Wall in 1990, shortly after that was, you know, so we've got tremendous memories, you know, and it was really an adventure. So what was the selfish side of me was, yes, I'm helping people, but I'm living this pretty cool adventure of, you know, exploring the world and seeing other cultures and, you know, get my hands dirty.
You mentioned you were, so were you at the Berlin Wall when that was starting to collapse? You mentioned picking up pieces of that.
Yeah, so just after, so it opened up in, I believe in November of '89, is when it started to fall. We were there in April of May of '90. So they were disassembling it. I've got, you know, grainy video from my Sony camcorder of the Germans disassembling the Berlin Wall, where, you know, people died for climbing it, right? So it's pretty amazing.
Harry, when you think about that, did that change your perception at all about the concept of freedom? Because I would think if that were me, and this is why I asked the question, is we have never been a country where we've had states divided by a physical border. Some to the degree that Germany was basically split in two. You had East Germany and West Germany, and it was the Berlin Wall, and those people in East Germany, a lot of times, to your point, would climb the Berlin Wall to go to West Germany because it was the free part of Germany. Did that change your perception at all of the concept of freedom?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you think about how easy it is to travel in the U.S. and to go anywhere in the world, and then so you know, I didn't really understand the whole Berlin thing. I thought the wall was really to protect the East Berliners, but being there, I realized no, it's not about protecting the East Berliners. It's about preventing the East Berliners from escaping.
Yeah.
And that blew my mind. I said, this was 1990, right? This wasn't the 1600s. This was 1990. And to me, like World War II and that whole, you know, obviously the atrocities that were committed in World War II, because it happens before birth, it could have been, you know, 500 years ago. But when you see that for real and you hear the stories and you're speaking to people, I mean, my wife and I were recently married at that time. And, you know, we wanted to get involved in meeting people, right? So we were over there on our tour of our faith, right? And meeting people that way, but we just separated and said, let's go get in the mix. Right. And so we started talking to people, you know, it was weird. I mean, we're so naive, but I mean, the world back then was different. We didn't have as much fear as maybe there is today, but started speaking, people asking, you know, who spoke English. And before long, we were, you know, speaking to a guy who, you know, was showing us all the things from World War II and what happened in the fall of, you know, what they dealt with the whole Berlin Wall going up. And it was just amazing. So yeah, did that impact us? Absolutely. As far as, you know, there's no, when people complain and moan about the US, I just, you know, we have no clue as to what it really could be like, right?
When you started meeting people, and I'm sure you encountered people that lived on the East German side of the wall.
Yeah, absolutely.
When they shared their stories with you, what was the overwhelming theme to their story that they shared with you about the new Germany? that they were
Well, I
living
mean,
in?
there was concern. I mean, so this goes back also to Russia as well, because Russia was communist. And so freedom, I think the country, without being political here, is that people learn just because people are free doesn't mean that they automatically fall in line with democratic values. So they were raised for 40 years or so, 30 plus years. I think the wall went up in 1960 or so. So it's 30 years. I mean, that's a whole generation of young people that grew up that way, and people that were, 15 were now 45. So their entire adult life was living like that. So the commonality was freedom is awesome, but we really don't know what the heck this means. And there was a ton of anticipation, concern, and we were just happy to be a part of it because we're saying this freedom is so awesome. This is so great. And financially, I think those people, they suffered for quite a bit because they had everything given to them, and then they had to go out and kind of figure out that capitalism was a little bit different.
Well, and when you are, to your point, and I was thinking as you were saying that about the person that was 15 when things quote unquote locked down. Okay. Mm-hmm. So you're 15 years old, you're a teenager, and the next time you have a taste of freedom in the way that you're tasting freedom, then you're a middle-aged man. I'll be 48 in August.
Yeah.
I can't imagine spending 30 years of my life and then all of a sudden them going, it's over.
Right.
We're free.
Yeah.
And it just becomes a distant memory. That, do you think that, how in coming back from that trip, how did that trip change your life and your perspective on life?
Yeah, I mean, so I think that the big thing about traveling and seeing, so there's one thing about traveling in general, that it opens up your eyes to how big the world is, and that your views are not always the best views, right? Mm-hmm. So, and then the whole thing about being compassionate with others. So I'll give you an example, is that when Russia collapsed the Soviet Union, when the Soviet Union collapsed, it wasn't automatic freedom, mm-hmm. right? So people didn't know what to do. And so we met, and it's two things that really stood out. One is we met with a university professor, University of Leningrad, right? So he was still trying to get comfortable with the fact that they were calling Leningrad St. Petersburg now. And he was asking us questions about the U.S. And he had a daughter that somehow left, and I don't remember the story, but this guy was just fascinated that he could speak with Americans in his own country. And his line was, that I'll never forget, was, "I'm free, but we have no food."
Wow.
Right. So,
yeah.
Right. So if you think about going into a store, and this is a major city in the world, St. Mm-hmm. Petersburg is not a small city, and going into stores, and the things that you saw were vodka, cooking oil, and maybe a little bread. And, it was just, the shelves were empty. Mm-hmm. So it was the same deal as, people, I mean, similar, a little bit of humor, but imagine going to Costco, right? People are lined up going to Costco, and, they're all in line orderly, and they go in, and there's, a few little scraps for the day, and you had to do the same thing all over the next day. Mm-hmm. But that's what those people were doing, because since the communists, everyone was working, quote unquote, working with communism. When that collapsed, there was no immediate, hey, I'm going to start my own business now. Mm-hmm. Right. So the other funny thing was so all the parks, there's no one cutting the grass in the parks. Mm-hmm. So the grass was we were there in the summertime. So June, July timeframe, the grass was probably, no joke, 3 feet tall. And there are people, when we were walking by, people would pop their heads up out of the grass. So they were like laying in the grass, sunbathing, in hay, which we would look at as like a field of hay where the grass, I mean, it was almost impossible to comprehend that someone would be lying in that. But that was the status of the parks. Again, because the government was making any money, so no one's cutting grass in the parks. So it's just a very bizarre experience that just totally opened up my eyes that, hey, this freedom is not automatic. People don't know what to do with it. And, you know, we've got it made in this country, but not everyone gets the way we are. So we think because we're Americans in general, we go somewhere, people they're fascinated with us. It's not always the case, right? Because we're so foreign to them sometimes.
Now you've got my wheels turning because now I'm thinking to myself, how do I grow my grass around the perimeter of my property to get it about 3 feet high and then mow the inside to where I can enjoy it? But I have like this 3 to 4
natural fence.
A natural fence. That's exactly right. A natural fence.
Yes. So those visuals just do not leave, right? It just
they do not. They do not leave.
Yeah.
So let's fast forward a little bit. You spend time in Germany. You spend time in Russia. You've also done mission work in the Dominican Republic. Now you have to decide on a career, right? You have to figure out, how am I going to support my bride, and how am I going to, we'd like to have kids, and as all people do, when they get to that point of, okay, what do I got to do now?
Yeah, especially from a guy who never was a good planner.
We forgot about that. So take us to your transition into your career in sales. How did that come about for you? Did you just have? And I know some guys. The reason I asked that, I know some guys that went to college to be teachers or whatever, and they quote unquote fell into sales and did very well. Was that you, or was that kind of a let's try this out and see what happens?
Right. So this was really made my dad very happy. Is when I went to college, I went for 1 semester and said, this is not for me. Right. So, I'm sure a guy with 2 degrees, So he was not pleased. But anyway, so I had, I'm going to just kind of think this through a little bit. But when I was in the DR,
Dominican Republic,
I had to visualize where I was going to be next, right? So when we decided that there's a certain point in life where if you're going to want to have kids, you have to do it before the clock runs out, right? Unless you adopt, but we weren't thinking that way. So we had the now or never moment. And so I was just sitting out in the veranda, so to speak, overlooking the valley. And I just put myself in a state of, so what's next? And, I just saw myself, totally visualized me in a car with a laptop computer going from business to business, right? I've never done anything that way. I didn't even have a computer. I knew laptops existed, but I was so foreign to technology. I said, well, this would be the way to go. I don't know how that all translates, but I saw it before it happened. And then I started reading, sales books and things about motivation afterwards when I was getting into sales. And it fell exactly into place, is that in order to have something happen in your life, you need to see it before it happens. And that stuck with me for the last 25 years or so.
So what was the first thing that you sold? You got into sales?
So I tried to sell health insurance to small businesses. And so again, I was really naive when it came to business. I had my own little painting and cleaning company, and so I did a bunch of little things, but I didn't really understand business. I had zero business acumen. So I looked up the classifieds for sales jobs, and there was one that said earn $50,000 a year, come to this place or whatever. So you meet at a hotel room or whatever. And I was very excited because they gave me a job, and it only cost me $300 to actually get the job. So wasn't really understanding that normally when you get a job, you don't have to pay. So
That kind of
Anyway.
reminds me, you said you liked comedy and you were talking about Russia. That reminded me of the comedian Yakov Smirnoff.
Yeah.
What a country. It only
Right,
cost me
right,
$300
yeah.
to get a job.
Yeah, exactly. So I came back home. So we had no money, right? I had a credit card. So we ended up buying cars, used cars with credit cards. And I added more. Here I was, I'm going to start making an income.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just adding more to the credit card bills. So yeah, it was a brilliant move. But that led to, me realizing that this was what sales was like. And then I had a conversation with an old friend, and he introduced me to the industry, which I have not left today, is still the copier document technology space. And yeah, pretty much made a career out of it. But it wasn't easy.
In that space, that world has changed so much. I remember when I was a kid, probably 40 years ago, my dad spent a short time working for a copier company up here in West Virginia. And I remember at that time, it was a tough industry, and because printing was not, people didn't think, and computers were coming into play and things like that. If you wanted something printed, you sent it to a print shop, or some companies had their own print shop, and
Yeah.
and it was, your document production was a typewriter and a piece of paper, and that's what you did. That's how you produced documents, was with a typewriter and a piece of paper.
Right.
As the technology changed, what did you find that you had to do to change along with it?
Yeah, so I started, and color was new to the industry. And so the owner of the company I worked for said, you would be good in promoting this new color technology. So I had no client base. It was, color was really a brand new thing. So everything was a new placement. So we were introducing color technology, color print technology to companies, and it cost somewhere around $20,000, $20,000 to $50,000.
Mm-hmm.
And no one was looking for a $20,000 to $50,000 printer. Trust me. Mm-hmm. So we had to learn about their business. I learned a ton about graphics, Mac computers, Adobe, applications like Quark Express. And I was one of those that I felt like I needed to know more than I really needed to in order to start talking about it. So I was paranoid that I wasn't going to know enough and someone's going to ask me a question. And then before long, I realized, I'm never going to know this. Let me at least get started. I knew enough to be dangerous. And then the owner decided that it'd be good to have a team around me for these high-end solutions of printers. And, we started doing team selling, and I learned a ton from the different ways of looking at things, different personalities, analytical people, great personalities, outgoing people. And then, me just tagging along saying, hey, I found these people, let's go talk to them. So,
well, and yeah. I think that is so interesting, Harry, because it harkens me back to earlier in our conversation, when you were talking about you and your wife getting into Berlin and saying, let's go away from the group and let's get into where the people are. Let's mix in and let's see what we can see here. And I see that sense of exploration as you were talking about your transition into selling collar technology. Have you always considered yourself an explorer type?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So just the funny, dumb things, right? And it goes, I'm not sure where to start, but I remember when we were in the Bahamas, we were doing our, big into faith and spirituality and helping others. Someone brought us to the Bahamas. Good friends of ours said, look, we're going to take you on our trip with us. And so I'm sitting there on the beach with my wife, and I said, wouldn't it be great to live on a tropical island? Mm-hmm. And in 2 years, we're living in the Dominican Republic. I mean, it's just, would say things like that, and thank God my wife, I mean, she just, I tell her all the time, it's like, I don't know how you put up with me and all the dumb things, but it's that sense of adventure, and trying different things that has kept, I feel like life is too short just to be status quo. That's why I left the small town mentality and wanted to kind of explore the world a little bit.
I asked my wife the same thing, and she responds with one word.
Yeah.
Prozac. Prozac is the word she responds with. That's how she says she puts up with me. No, Harry, I want to transition here in the few minutes we have left.
Sure.
I want to transition to a time that you faced a really big obstacle, and talk to me about the biggest challenge, the biggest obstacle that you overcame in your life, career, whatever it might be. You talked early in the conversation about the obstacle of being the youngest in the generation, separating you and your siblings, how different that is, and the differences between you and your parents. But tell me about the biggest obstacle maybe you faced in your life or your career.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the biggest obstacle was that transition of coming from a world of, it was all about helping others and living on, I had my own business, but we just lived week to week, paycheck to paycheck, or whatever, So, but it was all for the bigger mission in life. So when we came back and we had nothing, right? And I'm telling you, we had nothing. We were staying with friends, and that just wasn't working out. I had no job. We had no money. Right? We had credit cards. So everything we were doing was on credit cards. So we were like, this is not a good, this is not a good plan. Right.
Yeah.
And then my wife said, we've got to go live in an apartment because we can't stay here. And I said, yeah, you're right. So let's go do that. So we're paying the dang landlord off of credit cards. And we're in a 3-room apartment. The bathroom was no sink in the bathroom. The sink was in the kitchen. So imagine having people over and say, yeah, there's the bathroom, but you wash your hands in the sink in the kitchen. And we were just dumb and naive. But I mean, it was just like, how am I going to get out of this mess? And, so you go from that and so it changed to me, once you do that, there's just, I don't have a lot of fear and anxiety that I'll ever be in that situation again. But that was the one that stands out, I think. But there's tons of others that when you're doing the living in the Dominican Republic, you're like, oh my God, moments. But that was the one that was
we may
the
have
longest.
to do a second Intentional Encourager podcast with you talking about your life in the Dominican. But you talked earlier about not being a natural planner.
Yeah.
Did that situation force you into becoming more of a planner? Because I'm that way too. I did not develop planning skills like I have now until I was probably in my mid to late 30s.
Yeah,
it just
didn't
come naturally to me.
Yeah.
Was that the moment that you kind of flipped the script and said, I got to get a plan together?
Yeah. So the job helped me with planning. Right. Again, I had no business acumen. I never read anything about planning. I mean, it just wasn't who I was. I was the adventure guy. Right. So had a thought and just go do it. So the idea of planning was foreign to me, but yes, the job helped me to get into the value of planning. And, I still struggle with it to this day, but I don't make any moves anymore without thinking them through. Right. So when you have, once you have kids, then your whole viewpoint of doing things spur of the moment pretty much has to change. Right. Because
the only thing spur of the moment you have to do is change a diaper or maybe go to the ER or something like that.
That's right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. True.
Harry, the last question I've got for you, I can't thank you for your time. This has been great conversation. We could go for 2 hours. I mean, but we want to keep this to a nice, listenable
format.
Format.
Well, you can delete my portion, and it'll be very manageable.
Nah, that would leave us with zero because I don't contribute a whole lot to this thing. But Harry, what's your biggest piece of intentional encouragement to folks? Because again, we are in some unusual times right now. There is no question that our world as we know it's probably not going to be the same like we talked about with the German people that you encountered 30 years ago. What's your biggest piece of intentional encouragement to this audience in this podcast?
Yeah, it's really, I don't wish this to end, right? When you wish something to end, you're really wishing part of your life to go away. And I appreciate every single day. It's like, those are values that have been instilled in me for years. And you've got to, in spite of the hardship, in spite of the challenges, you still have to find ways to appreciate every day. And to me, I feel like I have to get better every day. So I'm looking now at pre-COVID to where I am now. Is my marriage better? I have to say yes. Mm-hmm. Is my relationship with my kids better? I have to say yes to that. Mm-hmm. Is my, the fact that I'm now doing podcasts, was completely foreign to me pre-COVID, mm-hmm. right? And I had all the doubts in the world. Why would anyone want to listen to a podcast? Who am I? What have I done? I'm not an author. I'm not a scholar. I just, I'm really, I'm not trying to be overly humble, but I'm nothing special. And so when you have all these doubts of this, it's hard to do it. But I just encourage people, get over the doubt and just put yourself out there and good things will happen. And just don't be overly consumed with Netflix and, Prime Video, because that's not going to give you, when you look back at this time, that's not going to give you the reward of, hey, I became a better person during this time.
I'd often wondered at times if Joe Exotic wasn't actually living in West Virginia.
Yeah.
That seems like the perfect West Virginia show.
Indeed. It works for Florida too, though.
Right. It's a dude that's got exotic animals. It's like, oh my goodness, man. Probably somewhere behind my studio here are running some exotic animals, at least the deer I see in my yard come fall and things like that. Harry Spaight, tell people where they can find your content, connect with you, things like that. I would strongly encourage you to connect with Harry. If anybody is the epitome of an intentional encourager, it's Harry Spaight. How can folks find you?
We appreciate that. My partner and I, Eric Konovalov, are on the B2B sales group in Facebook. And if you look for Lead, Sell, Grow on iTunes and listen to a podcast and download it, that would be awesome. But this is all about sharing and helping others is what our mission is. So even though the title is Lead, Sell, Grow, it is the human experience. So we're really trying to tie in humanity with sales and leadership and not just making money in sales, right?
And you can also find him on LinkedIn at Harry Spaight, Spaight, Harry Spaight. Harry, thank you so much for being with me.
It's been a real pleasure, Brian. You're the master.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
You got it, bud.
My thanks as always to producer Bryce Sexton and technical advisor Matt Means. And the ultimate thanks goes to the Lord Jesus Christ, who provides intentional encouragement every day through his word. And until next time, remember, everyone, everywhere, at any time, and any place can be an intentional